So let us get started with this session. If you see on the screen, it's part three. Basically, we had two sessions. One session, I think, around 2 months back. So wherein we had covered up all the basics of Salesforce along with the building blocks in Salesforce and how to get started with Salesforce. So any one of you who is new to this session can probably after the session can go to this tiny URL/mferd, the link that is shared in the chat in WhatsApp chat. So and you can go through those sessions wherein I have covered in detail about what is Salesforce and how does it work and what are the building blocks in Salesforce and what is configuration and customization and different automation processes in Salesforce. Uh, when I say automation processes, I mean it's just on the point and click button how you can design a functionality in Salesforce. That is like I've also quoted with a few examples for a workflow. How does it work and a process builder with scenarios and also an approval process as well. So these things are already covered up. So in the previous session, so probably you guys can go through who are new to this. So the main important thing in Salesforce is like when we switch to Salesforce from other domain, we are fine with the admin part. Like we already have material readily available in the internet, and people who are new to IT or something, it's easy for them to understand what Salesforce is, and they can easily configure get along with the automation processes that are provided by Salesforce. But the actual challenge comes when if someone wants to switch from configuration to customization, that is nothing but Salesforce development. So what is the need of Salesforce development and how one can switch his career from Salesforce admin to Salesforce customization? That is actually a bigger challenge, and to to practically see it, it's not that difficult because once you are accustomed to Salesforce automation processes, all you have to do is probably a bit of effort, wherein you just try to learn a few basics in Apex language and get on with the development part. So this particular session will focus more on the development part. So rather than just being a presentation, I know probably make it a hands-on session or an interactive session wherein I'll try to show you like basic things as well, like how to create a list map. Probably some of you might be aware of how those things are done in Java and all. But just want my main aim is to just show like how it is. Feasible even for a person who is from a Java background, who can switch his career from Java to Salesforce development, wherein JavaScripts and HTML, CSS also play an important role. And Apex language being in itself, it's similar to Java. So those things kept in mind. So we'll get started. So the agenda of my presentation today would be Salesforce automation processes recap that is already done, wherein like what is process builder, what is a flow, what is a workflow. So those things are covered up there. So I think rather than probably presenting this, I'll probably focus more on the differences between what configuration and customization. And when you're getting started with Salesforce development, what is Apex language, and what are the basics that are involved in Apex language, and what is it that one has to know, one has to keep in mind when he is doing when he is coding, like the best practices that he has to keep in mind. Because ultimately the real situation, real challenges that a developer faces is sometimes the functionality that he develops would be achieved, but the CPU usage and the system performance goes for a toll when sometimes when he is not following the best practices in Apex coding or in Salesforce. And also we'll see like the basic thing in development is the trigger, which is actually a very interesting topic, and it does not have much coding, wherein if you want some development part to be completed, that can be done probably in a piece of code, like which just involves 4 to 5 lines, and in that again 2 to 3 lines is just a syntax that you need to remember. So in my session later on, I would show you how a trigger works, probably with few scenarios as well. So that would be the major. I would be covering these part in the majority of my session. At the last, I just to brief up, before like completing, I'll just put a light on what is Lightning components in Salesforce, and what is the need of Aura and LWC, which is a buzzword in Salesforce industry. Like if a developer, if he is like kind of very good, if has a good hands-on experience in LWC, then industries are looking forward to hire them irrespective of the current market situation. And also I'll just let you know like what are the different ways wherein we can, through which we can enhance our Salesforce skills. We have one particular website provided, one particular module that is provided by Salesforce, that is Trailhead. So in that, wherein if you start completing your modules, basically you earn badges and points. So those points and badges are considered. You can put that up in your LinkedIn profile, and based on that, the companies gives you weightage uh, in your recruitment process. So that will be much of the coverage that I'll try to do it in today's session. So to get started, I'll just brief up what is configuration and customization in Salesforce. So already what we have seen previously, like in our sessions, what is configuration? That is, let me just open my tool and show you what exactly it is. So this is basically a Salesforce page, wherein if you want to like add any particular object, you can go to Object Manager and try creating a new object. I've also explained what is a custom object, what is a standard object. So if you notice, accounts, activity and all, they are standard products, standard objects, whereas these are the custom objects that are developed by the developer or the admin, who would be doing as per according to the functional requirements or the business requirements for this particular organization. So that actually covers like adding more objects or fields, adding tabs. That is the, if you're working on look and feel of a particular object. So G survey is a custom object. So for the end user, how it should be visible, whether how many fields are to be displayed for him. We have more fields. So that also can be done through configuration. Like we also have security models in Salesforce, wherein sharing of records amongst the associates or the people, that is also a very important topic that I have already covered in previous session. So that is also part of configuration. And working on the automation process, like validation rules, process builders, lightning flows, and approval process, all this is covered in configuration. Whereas in customization, it's like Apex classes and triggers, and also working on the same page loads, we can use visual force pages, wherein if at all, if there is a limitation, wherein as per a functional requirement, if we have any particular requirement which is not fulfilled by the available Salesforce automation processes. So that in that way, in that scenario, we can go ahead with customization basically, and creation of lightning components, etc. So as already told, what is Salesforce customization? It's basically the process of I would request everyone to go on mute. Uh, that's causing a lot of disturbance. Yeah, thank you. So what is basically Salesforce customization? It's nothing but you're using a development path to achieve some robust features in your CRM, that is customer relation management tool. So that is wherein Salesforce customization comes into picture. And customization is actually it is adopted by major organizations, because see, admin part and administration or configuration, anyone can do it as part of the organization which is local. But at a higher level, when certain organizations, certain clients, wherein they want certain what do you say, complex features to be enabled in the CRM.
Hello.
I think Ramiz Memon, can you please go on mute? So customization actually, it's like when you want certain scenarios, certain complex features to be enabled, that is wherein Salesforce development can be used. And advantages of Salesforce customization is like it's easy to build if you're familiar with Apex language, and there is no limitation. You can code as per the requirement. There is no such limitations, and you can achieve complex requirements based on your coding standards and development part. And yes, higher customer satisfaction and retention because yes, I mean if you know if you explore more in this area, you would get to know like how feasible it is to achieve functionalities with less piece of coding compared to other conventional modules. So this is one slide I felt like is very important when someone is like trying to switch from an admin as an administrator to a Salesforce developer. So how he can achieve certain things through both ways. Like if he wants certain functionalities to be achieved, then through customization way, what is the way, and through programmatic approach, what is the way. If you notice, if for a user interface, like for the look and feel of the application, directly Salesforce provides with the page layouts and the record types and lightning app builders. Okay, so here it's like just point click and point click functionality and drag and drop, and there is nothing much no, not much technical knowledge is involved. But if there might be certain situations wherein the page layouts and and the user look and feel is like sort of complex that is required by the client. That in that way during that situations, the visual forces, visual components and lightning components like LWC will come into picture. Then business logic is nothing but the backend logic. We have gone through what is validation tools, what are formula fields, etc., and approval processes, etc. So these are actually provided by Salesforce. So again, these things can be controlled by Apex controllers or Apex triggers with less piece of code. So it's like up to the developer based on the situation and like what is the best way to achieve it, either through a configurable way or through development. Again, for custom objects, custom fields and relationships, the same thing can be done through metadata APIs, REST APIs, bulk APIs. Let's not focus on this because this is somewhat that is not much needed when you're trying to switch from admin as an administrator to a Salesforce developer. So the first thing to know what for a developer is to get started, beat anyone, to know what is an Apex language. Basically, it's developed by Salesforce. It's an object-oriented language, that allows developers to execute flow and transaction control statement on the Force.com platform server, which is nothing but the Salesforce platform. So just to keep in mind, it's not, we cannot say that it's a limitation of certain things, but these are the things that every developer has to keep in mind, that it has certain governor limits. There is certain maximum limitation in terms when you're fetching up the records through your database language query, and it can only be compiled on the server, and no local compiler is needed, and it's not a standalone language. And one important feature of Apex is it supports DML operations. So that's nothing but if you're trying to create a record or update a record or an insert a record, that is wherein this particular language supports that. So I would take you through a sample code wherein we use these DML operations, and I'll show you that probably in few minutes. So basically, like there are certain basics which are actually common to all the languages, be it Java or Apex, anything. So variable declaration, as we know, what is a variable declaration? It's just like we with the data type, we declare variable, and if you want to store values in that, and that is where variable declaration is used. And SOQL query is nothing but database language. It is similar to SQL query when if you're trying to fetch certain records from Salesforce database, then you can use that. So let's see what we can. Let's see what with an example here. Is my developer console visible? Anyone can just answer.
Yes, sir.
It's visible, right? Okay.
Yes.
So If you just want to run a piece of code independent to anything, you can just open this, go to, this is how a developer console looks like. So for a developer, this is everyone should know this. So if you go to debug and execute, open execute anonymous window, therein you can just run any independent code, or if you are developing some method or in an apex class, if you, for testing purpose, if you want to call that, so that is when you can use this thing. So it's basically for testing at backend. So there is already a system debug. So basically, if you want to print anything in a string, right, that is wherein you use a system debug. So I'll just execute this. So as soon as I execute, I'll just see the debug logs, what it is. So if you notice, this is printed as hello. So if I just try to, just declare it in some variable. So I've just stored that value in debug, and it's printing as per the assignment. So this is how you basically declare a variable. I think most of you know that. Just to start off, and someone are new to this, to keep everyone in line, I'm just showing how it works. So apart from that, I'll come back to SOQL query and what is a loop statement, what are flow control statements, and all probably in the next thing. But yes, if you notice, this is just a sample screenshot that I've taken, and just wanted to know like how a variable is declared. This is nothing but a list. So when we speak about variable and all, right, we have certain things, so a concept of collections in any language. That is, that would be a list, a map, and a set basically. So whenever you're developing a code, it's always better to write a code which is probably feasible with bulk records basically. So I'll come back to that point probably later in situation in my session. So for now, just keep in mind that there is a concept of a list, a map, and a set. So what exactly is that? And so under variables, if you're trying to declare something, so here if you see in line number 2, I'm declaring a list. So to declare a list, this is a syntax wherein you just declare list. In the triangular brackets, you define whether it's an S object or a data type. That is, if you want it in the form of a string, then you can just define that and you can initialize that. So let me show you that as well. So this is a list I'm trying to so I'm defining a data type. This is a list defining the data type. I'll just give it some name, that is sample. It's always a best practice. See, in Apex, you need to keep in mind that whenever you're declaring any variable or a list or anything, any string or a list, so it's always better to start off with a small letter, and also like at the last, if you're defining as a list, so just end it with a list, or when you're defining a string, just end it with str, or when you're defining a map, just end it with map. So this is how you define a list basically. And once you define the list, you can add values in that. So the simple thing is just whatever the list that you have created, just put dot add next to that. That's a standard method, and you can add anything that you want. So it's like, I just enter Salesforce, Salesforce, and then again I'm trying to enter some other value, dot add customization. I'm just adding these random values just to, then I just try to debug this. It's debug. I'm just trying to print this. So the like we have this print f, right? So in Java it's the same. I'm just trying to do that. Or you can use alert in Java or console.log to print the values. So that's how we use here as well. Here we use system debug. So the values are getting printed. See, sample list is Salesforce, customize. So basically, a list is nothing but an ordered collection which allows duplicates. So let me just give an example. What I'm trying to say. If I try to print this again, I mean, I'm just trying to add the same value again. So I'll be the same thing is printed twice in the list. See, Salesforce customization. In the same way, but the major difference comes when that most of us try to actually we actually forget this thing, because but this is an important thing that we need to keep in mind. The major difference between a list and a set is set actually is an ordered collection which does not allow duplicates. So I'll since this everyone knows, I'll just ping it in the chat if anyone wants to just wants to for the reference. So no, I'll try to initialize a set. Set is nothing but it's again an all. It's similar to a list, but it does not allow duplicates basically. So if you want to probably store some unique values, that is wherein a set concepts comes into picture. So it is similar to how we define a list. It's just that again you're defining a set, you're defining a data type. Here I'll just change it to set. This is nothing but just a set name. I initialize it. I'll try to add these values in the set. And I'll print it. But in set, one thing is, as you have seen in list, it's like the Salesforce is printed twice. But when you're defining a set, it's like it does not allow duplicates. It just prints once. So if you notice, see, the Salesforce is just printed once, and also uh, it's like it just defines, because this is used when you're defining some unique records, when you have certain record IDs. That is wherein this concept of sets is used. Please share the document link and Salesforce test instance sandbox for practice. Actually, Haja, I have covered this part in previous sessions. So probably you can log into tinyurl and you can m/mferd and check out those sessions. Then you'll get to know that. Probably at the later of session, if I get time, I'll try to share certain things. So now coming back to what is a map, basically. Basically, map is nothing but, as the name suggests, it's a key value pair, wherein if you want to retrieve certain values based on keys, that is wherein you use this. For instance, again, map. When you're defining a map, you can define, because since we have two things in this, two parameters, key and value. So I'll just use two values here and sample map. You can stop me if you have any queries related to this, whatever I'm trying to explain you guys. But see, since it's a map, we have an operation called as put. So I use that. First, we define a key, like let's say name, comma, Ahmed. Same way, I'll try to add another value. Name org. Yes. Okay, unexpected column 5. Sample map, sample map. Created a map. Dot put sample map dot put. This. So if you notice, like once I've created a map, I'm able to get the key value, that his name is Ahmad and org is CTS. At the same time, if I'm trying to, if I want to fetch the value with get, like I just want CTS based on when I pass the value as org. That is the key. By passing key, if I want the value, even I can fetch that by using a get functionality. Get. So this, see, the values I'm getting based on the keys what we are defining. So this is how we can use maps basically. So this is a basic example of how a list map and a set is created. So that is what is done here, and this is an SOQL query. Basically, it's nothing but a database language that is used to fetch the records that you want. That is already there in Salesforce. And also, if you notice, this is nothing but loop again. If you want to just run a piece of code multiple times, for a predefined number of times. For instance, there is a list, and based on certain values, based on certain certain values that you're getting from a database query, and if you want to run this particular loop, or if you want to run a piece of code based on by updating certain fields based on the number of records, so that is wherein use of for loop. So that is what is done here. And again, control statement is nothing but we are defining certain entry conditions, that is on conditional basis this needs to be updated. So it's not necessary that when you're writing a code, probably based on certain scenarios, you might have to just over see certain code, or if you don't want the system to read a particular code, and it should only be based on certain conditions. And then it's always a better practice, like to use these if conditions in order to increase the system's performance. And to keep certain things in mind, when you're defining certain when you're defining any string, right, we need to use a single quote, and the apex language should always be terminated with a semicolon. If you have seen, I have used the same thing here. So for all the statements, we need to use a semicolon. And map I have already explained, like what is a map and where, when is the key value pair used, how it is useful when when you're developing in certain context. It would be better if you want to like retrieve certain specific values based on the keys. And also you can easily handle the exceptions or errors or DML exceptions in Apex language. So once a developer, I know, he's accustomed to what Salesforce is and how it works. So this is one of the very important thing that he needs to keep in mind. That is the order of execution in Salesforce. Since we have configuration, we have customization. That is, we have certain what do you say, automation process like approval processes and process builders, flows. At the same time, we have customization things like triggers, visual force pages, etc. So there might be some sequence, right, in which certain things have to be run on priority. Like you might have a formula field, at the same time you have a validation rule. So and at the same time you might have a customized validation rule. One is a system validation that you have, and one is like through coding you have added some validation. So how does that work? And based on this, how a developer has to take a decision. So that is wherein this order of execution plays an important role. So we need to understand, like the first thing that runs that actually executes in Salesforce is nothing but sales system validation. That is, if at all, if a field is set to mandatory from here. Let me show that. I just open this an object, and we have fields and relationships, and here I just open account name, and I set this field as mandatory. Sorry, I'll open any custom object. So if you're setting any mandatory fields, I think I'm logging from another profile. So at that time, when you're refining a mandatory field here, when you're setting the mandatory field here, that is the first thing that runs. So if there any field is required, and if the format is wrong, that is entered by the user, so that will be the first validation that is checked. And what before triggers are nothing but piece of code that are executed before any DML operation is performed. So I'll come back to this when we talk about triggers. So it's like whenever there is a record inserted or updated, so before that, a piece of code that is that runs in the form of trigger, that is executed. Then we have custom validation rules. So what is custom validation rules? Basically, these are the rules that you're developing in your Apex language, or you're defining in your JavaScript in LWC. That is the custom validation that are checked. Then after triggers are nothing but uh, sorry after triggers are nothing but these are the triggers that are run after DML operation is performed. So then we have assignment rules. Assignment rules is nothing but that is again an automation process where when you're using this service as a cloud in Salesforce, and when you're working on any tickets, or when you're in any support project, or when you're supporting any application, that is wherein, like, if at all, if a high priority ticket is there and if it's not resolved, high priority issue is there, or a defect is there and it is not resolved, then it goes to the higher manager. So like if any escalation is involved, that is wherein assignment rules comes into picture. So that is executed and run next. Then we have auto respond rules, which again I have discussed it when we have spoken about workflows, etc. And then we have workflows that will executed that will be executed. Then we have escalation rules. Then roll up summary. Again, this is something that is again an automation process that we have in Salesforce for master detail relationship. So that will run. So then we have criteria based sharing rules. That is, in security models we have discussed what sharing rule is. So that will be executed. So this is kind of a very basic question, and is an interviewer's favorite question every time when a developer, no matter how much experience he has, this is the question that is asked, or that is portrayed, or that is expected to be answered by anyone. And also, like, they might not ask this question directly, probably, they might just give a situation wherein there is a system validation rule and a before trigger is there. So they might ask like, what is it that will be first executed, etc. So they'll just probably play around, but ultimately this question is kind of very common. So you guys can just take a screenshot or keep in mind, like, this is how the execution works. So once we have seen what Salesforce is, I would also take you through, like, what exactly a for loop is and how we can use this. Okay. So again, I'll just open this part. Before this, I'll create a list on an S object. So good thing about Apex is, like, it allows, rather than defining data types like string, numbers, etc. We can also define what we say, the S objects. That is the objects that we have it in Salesforce. I'll name it as account object. Then I can directly run a query basically. So query is nothing but Salesforce object query language. So that actually is used when you are trying to fetch records from Salesforce database. I already have this wherein I can run it here if you notice in query editor. But rather than that, I would use this Salesforce extension that is kind of a very helpful extension. Even you guys can install it. Once you have your org ready, you can just install the Salesforce inspector in your system, and after that it's like very easy for someone to just query in objects with certain fields. So if you go to data export, I'll have this particular page open. So I'll just see it based on the metadata. It actually recommends me all the fields. So if I've selected account, so it gives me the different fields that are already there in this particular um, object. So I'll just limit it to 20 since I don't have any validation. So it's again, see, this Salesforce object query language is similar to SQL, if any one of you are aware. It's simple. It's just like it starts with a select. Then we have the fields that we define. Then we use a from and an object, basically which object, from which object you're trying to fetch the records. And then we have a where condition. So you can just specify where date, or like name is so and so, something like this. Something like this. You can just define whatever under the where conditions that you want. So for now, I'll just use this part. That is, I'm just limiting to 10 records irrespective of any where condition. So I'll just export it. So if you use this extension, it's like you can easily copy these details into Excel format to your Excel sheet, etc. So I would recommend to use this particular extension. So since I have 10 records in this, I'll just try to put these records in this list. Rather than using an ID, I'll just use a name. Then I have a map basically. So in this map, I'll just run a for loop. Like for loop, like it starts with for, then you can define any condition, then you have a flower brackets. So in this for loop, I'll just keep for. I'll initialize an object, that is account. This is nothing but the standard API name that you'll again find it here. You can easily go to this object manager, and when you're initializing anything, just see the API name. It's account. So I'll just use the same thing, and I'll give any name to this, like alias name, like ACC, that belongs to from this list. It's actually checks. Now we have around 10 records, right? It basically checks those 10 records. Like this, it checks 10 records, and it adds those values into this. So I'll just dot put. I use ACC. That is nothing but I'm adding the ID as a key. Dot ID. then there is a queue, then I have this value. Okay. So what it actually does is, since these records that we have 10 records, it actually runs a for loop. It checks every record until these records are completed, and it's like it adds the key as this value, that is the record ID, and the value as Airbus. So let me just print it for you. System.debug. I'm printing this map. So if you notice, it's like it is printing all the values based on this thing. Like this is one map. This is one map. That is, this is the key. That is, if you notice here, Boeing, then with the ID. This is the ID 6AA. So in this way, it is printing for all the values. So I can also do one thing. I'm just printing the size. You can just use the size and see what is, how many records are there. So there are around 10 records basically. So you can use size to check that. And if you want, again, I have explained you like how based on the get, how you can get the value from by just entering the key. Now I want to get this value, or I want to get this value, or I want to get any of these values. So I'll just probably use this one. I'll just pass this key value and see key and check what is the value for that. See, it's Airbus. I need to just give a space here, so that's fine. So if I just pass the key, then I'll get the value for this. So this is how a map is used in real time scenarios. So that is like pretty much that we have covered on terms of basic. So once we know we know all this, and we have kept in our mind like what is a for loop, what is a while loop, and what are these conditional statements, and what is an SQL. It's always important to know what are the best practices that are involved in Salesforce. So when I say this, it's like, as I told initially as well, we might achieve a functionality, but at the same time, system performance would go for a toll, or it would be affected. Like the CPU consumption will be high. Again, your application may slow down. So that is the reason we have certain things that we need to keep in mind when you are when a developer is designing his code, or writing an Apex class. So if you notice, the first thing is bulkify your code. What does this bulkify your code mean? Basically, as per our current example also, if you take this example, it's like this is handling all the values. It's like when you're using a for loop, it's like it's basically taking into consideration multiple records irrespective of any number of records. Our this piece of code runs. So it's not like, if without giving a for loop, if I just put this thing sample dot put, let me just show you that. So I have not used a for loop, and I have just directly put this value. Then what happens is only the last value gets added here. So this will run, this particular query will run SOQL query. Then in the map, what happens is only the last value, if you notice this value, or based on the consideration, only one value gets inserted. So that is again not a right thing to do. Sample, okay, sorry. Not ID. This will not run actually. So it's like when you have multiple records with you, that is wherein that code is known as better code, because the user might there might be situations wherein the number of records is like not known to us. So that is wherein you need to make sure that when you're writing a code, your code handles multiple records basically. And also, second important thing is you need to avoid any DML or SOQL queries within the loop. That is, if you notice, even in this part of the code, I have used an SOQL query here, but I cannot use the same SOQL query within the for loops, because any query for that matter, if I try to do that, it's like you're hitting your database multiple times. For instance, if I just run this without a where condition, or even with a where condition, if there are 1,000 records or 10,000 records, so for loop is nothing but it's something that runs in an iteration. That is like it's kind of a cyclic process until all the records are cleared. So when you are trying to run this SOQL query every time, it's like you're hitting the database 10 times if you have 10 records, 1,000 times 1,000 records if you have 1,000 records. So rather than that, we can just initialize that particular one list, and try to save those values in one list, so that that hits the database once, and later on you can just utilize that particular SOQL query as per your needs. So that is this point. So I'll probably explain you when we see this trigger scenarios as well, when I can show you there as well. And avoid hard coded IDs. What does this mean? Basically, see here, I can just use where from account where ID is equal to, where ID is equal to so and so. But this is not a good practice, because these IDs, right, these are very specific to the sandboxes. That is, this org might have this particular record with this ID, but once this record is migrated, once a similar record with similar details is migrated to next new org, or when current certain context wherein this particular record is moved to the next org, so that is wherein the record ID changes. So again, you have to change your code as per this, which is not a good practice. So you need to either assign it dynamically in the sense, you have certain where conditions wherein based on that you can just assign rather than hard coding the values. So that is again one point that you need to keep in mind. And having a name convention, as I told you before, like when you're defining a string or a map, so I have started with a small letter, and when it's a list, I just give it as list at the last. So when I'm defining a map, I'm starting with a small letter, and just ending with map. So these are certain conventions that you need to follow. And again, avoid nested loops. A good strategy for this is to abstract your logic into separate method. So what does this mean is, so for instance, we have this one loop, and we need another for loop within this. So it's better to avoid that situation. Like here, see, if I just use another for loop, it's like we have multiple one within one for loop, there is another for loop, so it's like it gets nested every time. And when you have certain records with dependent values, so that is wherein this particular code becomes huge, and that would affect the performance. So rather than that, what you can do, you can create a separate method in an Apex class and try to call that whenever these conditions are satisfied. So that is what it means. Then also if it's better to use a single trigger per object. What does this mean? So be it any particular scenario that you're handling, you can use different events or context trigger events, but it's better to use a single trigger per object rather than having multiple. That's again one of the best practices that you can use. Then we have test multiple scenarios. This is a concept of text test class basically. So what we do is, when a developer, once he creates or once he develops a class, so the next thing what he does is like to make sure that his code coverage is done. So that is wherein he creates a test class, and he tries to pass the values and make sure that all of his class is covered, all the functionalities or all the operational things that he has developed in that class is covered. So the minimum coverage that is provided as per Salesforce standard is 75% of the code coverage has to be done, but it's always better to cover, like try to achieve more than 95%, which is again it's industrial norms in industries and all, they focus on this. So it's better to cover that. And it's better to use SOQL queries for loops. So this point and the second point might look contradictory, but it is not. Basically what it means is, if you see the screenshot, right, it's like you're directly passing the values within the for loop. You're not running this particular select ID from contact within for loop. Based on this condition, you're running the for loop. That is wherein it says like you use SOQL queries for for loops. So once this is covered, let's go to triggers. So far, any questions, anyone? You're following it, right? Hello?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
As per my understanding, this is looking like Oracle integration thing.
No, it's not integration. It's like simple Salesforce language with few scenarios. That's it.
Is it possible to give an example like how dynamically we can pass ID? Is it possible now?
Dynamically, see, we might have certain conditions, right? Based on that, we can pass the values. So it's not necessary that you're fetching the same record. You might have certain conditions. Like, let me show you. It will not be based on the values. Basically, it might be like active status, for instance, or annual revenue or billing, anything similar to that. So what you can do is like you can just fetch the records based on this condition where active is yes. So this might be one certain condition that you can put, and probably even one more condition like an annual revenue you know equals to, because in real terms also it will not be specific to any record. Like in real situations also it'll just be based on certain conditions like if it's if, for instance we are fetching the accounts based on certain
No,
annual revenue.
account number is there. That's why.
Yeah, sorry. So like this is how you can just fetch it. So you can just put these conditions rather than defining it with respect to any particular record ID. Anywhere
Yeah, got
conditions which will
it.
be common to any with this, since these things will be common, right? Because the API names of the fields and all will be common throughout any sandbox that you're working or any org that you're working, maybe testing or a production on. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So next, coming to this triggers, it's actually, as I explained initially, it's just a piece of code that is executed when certain DML operations are performed either before the operation is done or after the operation is done. So the syntax is pretty simple for triggers. It's like you just enter trigger followed with the trigger name and the object name on which you want this trigger to be run, and the trigger events. So I'll come back to what trigger events is, and again just specify the logic whatever you want to within that particular trigger. So we have two types of triggers. So one is before trigger and after trigger. Basically, just to keep in mind, before triggers are nothing but before the DML operations. If you're performing any piece, if you're running any piece of code that is, or any logic that you're performing through triggers, that is wherein you use this before triggers. It's actually used when you're trying to validate any record values or update values. So that is wherein you can use this in scenarios like that. And in after triggers, it's nothing but these are certain values. Like for instance, I'll be taking that example in my next trigger example. I'll show you that. So for instance, if there is one particular field like discount value or discount account field in your custom object, and once the user enters certain values, or like if the value is 100 or 200, and if you want to give a flat 10 or 20% discount on that, so you want that field to be automatically calculated once the record is saved. So that is wherein you can use an after trigger. That is, once the record is saved, after the DML operation is performed, this logic is incorporated basically. So that is wherein after triggers are used. And also, this is one important thing that you need to keep in mind of context variables. These are actually the variables that actually give you probably the runtime context, like when should the trigger be, when a particular logic within the trigger has to be executed, be it like if you are inserting a record or updating a record, or when the record is deleted, that is wherein you can use. So these are few certain context variables, like if you are using an insert, that is like it returns true if the trigger fired is due to an insert operation. Similar for the case of update, if it's an update operation, delete and before accordingly. So this is the context variable. You'll understand when I take this example in my trigger and so on. And these are nothing but the trigger events, like when you want the trigger to be executed. As I told, right, there are two types. That is, one is before update and before trigger and after triggers. So in before, again, we have different types, like we have insert scenario, update scenario, and delete scenario. Similar for the case of after as well, insert, update, and delete. But we have one extra scenario like after undelete. That is if you're, undoing when you have deleted a record, and again you want to just, you're rolling back those changes. That is wherein this fourth scenario comes into picture. And this is nothing but a table that is very helpful when you are writing triggers. I mean, basically it actually tells us when to use a trigger.new or trigger.new map. See, since a trigger.new and trigger.old is nothing but, if you are like, referring to present record information, that is wherein you use a trigger.new. And when you're referring to like a situation wherein after the record is updated, that is wherein you use trigger.old. So I'll take you through with an example. So let's open this up. So my requirement would be, if you see my screen, my requirement is we have the survey expense field here, right? So I want this field to be like, I want to just create an after insert trigger, wherein once the survey expense is entered, I mean, immediately it should calculate this expense to, it should just update it to 80% of the value that is entered. That is, for instance, I have entered it as 100. So as soon as I update that value here, it should change to 80. So I know this is like some sort of a basic example that I'm trying to give to show you how trigger works. I already have the trigger with me just to save time. So one of the most important practices that one needs to keep in mind is, like, when you're writing a trigger, right, it's better to not write a logic within the trigger itself. It's better to have a separate, what do you say, a class and a method in that wherein you're defining. So that is what I have done here, basically. So this is nothing but a trigger with the name of the trigger. I'm writing it on G survey. G survey is the object. Okay. And this is a before insert scenario. That is, this should run before the record is inserted, basically before the record is inserted into the system. So I have used this trigger event, see, the one that I've just showed you. Trigger dot is before and context variable, sorry, trigger dot is before. That is, this will be when the record is saved. So I have used that, and when the record is inserted. So what I'm trying to do, I'm just creating one list, basically. And what it does is, this will be pointing out to the current present record information. That is, I'll just show you. Yeah. So trigger.new is nothing but when I'm just hitting on the new button. So this particular list will have all the values that I enter here now. If I enter this survey name as this, so that will be saved in this GES list with under the survey name, because since I've defined it as an S object, so all the fields will be present in this list, basically. So that's what is trigger.new. If trigger.old is used, then it will not consider this, but instead we have, when we are like defining an old record, for instance, we are using the same record, this particular record. So that is wherein if I'm trying to update it, in case of update scenarios, then you can use trigger.hold. So for now, as you can see, I'm just creating a record. I'm creating a trigger with the trigger name. Then it's on a survey object. I'm just defining the context variables, like when it should be triggered, when the record is like inserted, and before it is inserted, I need to just run this particular method. This is nothing but the class name followed by the method name. So I'll just show what I have inserted in this. What is the logic that I've incorporated. So this is the class that I have used. In that class, I'm just using public class followed by the name of the class, then public again, static, and void is nothing but I'm not returning any values in this method, and I'm specifying the name of the values and the parameter that it is taking. It is taking this GIS list. This is nothing but the same list that we are defining it in our trigger. In this trigger, we are defining this list, right? The same list it's taking into consideration. So what it does is like it takes that, it runs a for loop, and for all the values, what it does, we have this field, right? Survey expenses here. Survey expenses field is there. So in that field, whatever the value that you enter, it just changes the value into 80% of that. If I want, I can change it to anything, probably into 0.7, something like that. So once I save it, I'll just try to create one record. So basically, as soon as I enter this, these values, whatever I enter, right? Like for example, test and its communication, survey rating, anything, good. And the value is 30, manufacturing date. Survey expense. So I'll just give it as 100. So all these values are stored in this GS list, okay, which is nothing but the list of that particular object. And as soon as I enter that value, what it does is this runs through that list and checks for survey expenses and just change it to 70% of this value. And this is run before the record is saved. See, the value is changed. But if you notice, if I try to update this value again, like to something like 50, the value is not changing. I mean, it's like 50 only. It's not 50% of this. So it's not an ideal scenario, basically. So what I'll do, I'll just, probably use in the same thing. I'll try to add up certain, see, once the advantage of having this particular, having to write the logic in a separate classes, if you're trying to update your code, so that is wherein, you can easily do that if you have it in bits is basically. So I want this to be executed even in an update scenario. Okay, so I'll just give before update. Okay, and in the same condition, I'm just adding an OR condition. Trigger dot is update. It's like I'm either checking the condition trigger dot is before insert, like before insert and before update operation. Let me check what the error is. Okay, we don't have anything. So again, that's it. Only I've added for update situation. I've added this scenario. I'll save it. Now when I try to, I'll just refresh this page again. I'll try to update the value now, probably to 40. Save it. So it's changed, 70% of that value. So this is how you can add any scenarios that you want accordingly to update or insert scenarios. In the same way, we have multiple triggers that I have used basically, but since we are running out of time, I'll just take you through one such example of duplicate trigger basically. So what it does is again it's similar, but here I've written the logic within the same trigger just to save time. I was not able to add it in a separate class. So what it does is like in G products, basically that is we have another another object basically. So the basic requirement is when I'm trying to create another record in this particular object, it actually should checks the unique. It should check the uniqueness of that particular record. That is, it should check the manufacturing date. It should check the product price and product type and name. It should check the product name, product type, manufacturing date, and product price. If these four values are same for any record, then it should throw an error that duplicate value is found. Okay, so that is wherein I have used this. So what I've done, I've just created a trigger. Again, the name of the trigger on particular object. And again, if you notice, since we are firing this trigger before the record should be created, right? Once the record is created, the duplicate value is created. So that is the reason we want this trigger to be executed in before insert event. So I did that. I've just created kind of four sets basically. I showed you how we create sets basically. So it's like first set is of string data type, and I've specified the name of that set. Again, for date, second set is of date data type. Third is this is for manufacturing date. This is for product type and product price. Product price will, since it'll involve the cost, so that's why I've just set it to decimal. So what I do here is, as soon as trigger.new is nothing but whenever there is a trigger.new that is defined, just remember that when you hit a new button, you get this page, right? So whatever the values that you enter in this present record information, that will be saved into this, like it's referring to those values. So I'll just give a value as test3, product type is aircraft, manufacturing is today's date. I'll just give it as test Salesforce. Product price is 100. So I just try to save this. So since I already have this record, what it does is, if I try to pass these values again, so what it does, it'll throw an error. So how it works basically, so as soon as I entered the values, those values are saved in these like sets basically. This stores the name of that particular product, and this stores the name of the manufacturing date, product type, product price, and we just create one list on G product, and that query just runs with by passing the where condition, wherein I'm just checking the product type, product name, and product list. If these values are matching this, then it throws an error that the duplicate values are found. So this is how basically you can design your triggers as per your scenarios. So I have covered majority of my part, like including the scenarios, trigger scenarios, etc. We have lightning components and types of lightning components, wherein we have Aura, LWC, and different syntaxes that are involved in that, and the major differences. But I think we can probably take this up in next session whenever we have time on this. So I think we have covered this. And Salesforce certification, it's like this is very important when you're like trying to hunt for jobs, because this actually plays an important role to give you an edge over others. When when you this particular when you have certifications like admin, PD1, and PD2, so that is wherein you get an edge over others. So if at all for an administrator, it's like admin, we have Salesforce provides with the Salesforce admin certification. For platform developer, to start with, you can take off with the PD1. So these certifications, if you do along with your knowledge, so it actually helps you in getting a job. So careers in Salesforce, it's like yes, the market is very good for Salesforce because every organization is adopting for Salesforce, and here are the few statistics wherein you can refer. Uh, because of which you have every reason to take up Salesforce from different domains if you want, even if you're interested. So that's pretty much that I wanted to cover. So any doubts or queries that you have, you can probably ask us. Any questions, any queries related to Salesforce or anything that was taught now? Yes, also one more thing is there is one website called as Trailhead that is provided by Salesforce. So you can, once you create your org, you can use the same ID to sign up here as well. So here you can, there will be different modules that you can use to, to obviously learn at the same time, improve your um weightage or increase your weightage over others by having these badges and points, which actually you can put it up in your LinkedIn profile, and also you can showcase during your recruitment process, because that actually carries a lot of weightage even within industries. When they are giving this year end appraisals and all, they do ask for the points, the badges, though I have very less, but it's like kind of like 40,000 minimum points for level senior associate level people, and like around 20,000 points that they need to have at least in Trailhead. So again, and also you have different modules that you can use it basically. So I'll probably just put this up in chat, you can check it. Any queries so far?
How much salary we can expect, like around 3.6 years of experience?
Is it for developer or what?
Like developer only.
See, it actually depends the way you negotiate with your HR. Okay, but there is good competition, and sort of good requirements as well for anyone who wants to seek a job. If you're really good with your skills, and if they know that you're an asset to them and they don't want to let you go, so I think easily you can expect around probably 12 to 15, I mean at a higher level, um, 12 to 15 LPA. So yeah, and people are earning more than that as well, but the provided you should have those technical skills. And one more thing is like, sometimes it might be easy to just clear up the interviews, but if you don't have your basics right, I'm not trying to just, I'm just trying to just give a heads up that sometimes people would go into a project and struggle there, if they don't have the basics right. So it's always a very kind of decision that you need to take. If you're going up for a higher salary, and if you're still like in your learning phase or something, then you have to face this particular challenge of learning and delivering it on time. So rather than that, I would say, for a developer, like if you're still in your learning phase or something, don't see about the salary. Probably for 1 year or so you can just work on a project which is good for you, and you're learning, and at the same time try out after, once you're confident on that. So salaries, yes, there is no kind of limitation that is there. I mean, there are companies that are offering you more salary because Salesforce is in demand nowadays. So yes, you can expect somewhere around that particular, um, probably, the range.
हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम
Thank you.
Walaikum salam.
जी I'm asking who can easily migrate into this. For example, three option. One who have Java developer has never done the Salesforce, and he's a Java developer or a SQL DBA or a SQL developer. So between these three, who can easily migrate?
See, I myself was into Java development a few years back, so I was also like I wanted to get into Salesforce. So I found it no difficulty in switching because Salesforce. See, the project works in such a way that most of the clients they want to go for they want to go with a configurable way. That is through whatever the associated automation process that is there to utilize that to achieve the functionality. So if it is not achievable through that is when the development part is done, but the developers should be should know that like when to go for development and when to go for when to use automation processes. So I think it's not that difficult for someone to jump into Salesforce, because see, Java language and Apex is somewhat similar only. And I did not speak about lightning components today, but in lightning components we have LWC, which is quite in demand now. Every company wants developers with hands-on experience in LWC, which is nothing but again JavaScript, HTML and CSS. So that is where like it's purely JavaScripts, and then from there, and if you want to like implement any Apex logic, that is wherein you use this Apex classes. So I think it will be much more easier for a Java developer to switch. Then I think SQL DB and all for for any fetching of records. There are not only development part is there, but there are other roles also in Salesforce. So like data migration, that is again in huge demand nowadays. So that is wherein probably SQL DBA can try his hands there. So yes, there are enormous amount of opportunities for everyone. So yes, and it's not difficult as well, because the material is readily available and it's not like kind of rocket science or something. Whatever the previous experience is there in terms of your skills, so you can implement that here.
Okay, Jazakallah.
Okay, Jazakallah. Anything else, or we can wrap up the session? I'll put up my number here. If anyone has any doubts or queries, you can probably check with me. My LinkedIn URL is already shared in the chat, right? So if for any queries or anything, you can just call me up or you can ping me on the chat. This is my number. Okay then, Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah for your patience.
Okay, Maaz bhai, Jazakumullah.
Jazakallah khair.
We are very thankful to you for this hands-on session and good learning on Salesforce. And inshallah, we can have further sessions also. And thanks to all the participants for joining this session. So with this, we close, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.